I'm Jody Lundgren. I'm the exhibits curator here at the museum, and super excited to share Richard Van Buren material witness with everybody here in South Dakota. When I saw Richard's work, I totally fell in love with it immediately. I love his engagement with process and materials and the organic sensibilities of his works and the way that these abstractions can evoke so many associations without being pinned down to any one thing. So I was super excited to be able to bring them here to South Dakota. So we'll give it over to Richard to tell us a little bit about his history and the pieces that are in the show today. We also want to invite anybody to throw out questions as we're going through it. We're going to kind of go through chronologically the pieces that were created upstairs with a little bit of background from where he came from in the 60s and 70s. So if you have a question along the way, just throw your hand up and I'll look for it and flag Richard. We might do a little bit of tag team, and I might throw some questions out myself too. So with that, we will go ahead and get going.
These pictures, this is my studio in Maine. I live in Perry, Maine, and live on the Bay of Fundy, and if people have been up there, it's a very extreme place in terms of kind of energy that nature presents up there. And you have a similar thing here with your wind, I know. But there we don't worry about the wind. It's more about the ice and the snow. But the forces up there are, in terms of, like wind as an example, is not that extreme. It's it's on the sea. I'm very much involved with movement, and of course the wind activates so much of nature up there. So it's important to me to view the movement, the changes in relationship to the wind. My place, the Bay of Fundy, our farm, if you call it a farm, 11 acres along this tidal river, and on the other side of the river is the Passamaquoddy tribe reservation. And the distance between the tribe and where I live, in terms of the water channel, the river, at low tide, it's about 6 to 8 feet wide, and then at high tide, it's a quarter of a mile. So the changes are very extreme and obvious. I mean, you actually hear the tide coming and changing, and you can hear the water over material, and so it's a very active place in terms of nature. And I think the people there, probably like you guys, I don't really know you people in terms of South Dakota, but are very in tune to. I mean, you see a lot of people who are friends are fishing and stuff. They still stop and look and spend time looking at, a vista or rock or whatever. So it's seductive, and the environment is seductive, and it's very energized. It's rarely just kind of quiet. There's always something going on in terms of nature up there. And this is me 6 months ago. This is in the Bowery, loft on the Bowery, and yeah. And this is me working in the studio, and I was talking to Jody earlier. Life magazine did this thing on Linda Banglis and Eva Hess and Richard, Sarah, and myself, and this came out of that. And that other shot of me smiling going across was sort of this. Yeah, I was sort of like glad it was all over with, because they showed up with like 5 people, the film crew, and they wanted me to, not a film crew, a photograph, strobes for photography. And they wanted me to build a piece so they can see the process. And I really can't work under those conditions with people and stuff. And so I was faking it. I was actually doing. This is part of my process at the time. But I was faking in the sense that I really thought I was going to build a piece. In fact, I was concerned I didn't use too much material to waste it for this. And after they left, I kind of liked what I did, and I ended up finishing the piece, and I think that's the one that's now in the Chicago Art Institute. So yeah, this is earlier work. The piece up in the upper right-hand corner is a piece that's very important to me. A piece called Angels, kind of a metaphor of how many angels they had with in business. And that took years to do. It was a funny kind of self-discipline where I really worked hard not to think. I would take just T-pins, like Mac pins, and stick them in a 2x4, like a lot of them. And it's very traditional. I use a palette knife and acrylic paint, and I would just paint on the top of a pin, and trying not to really develop some sort of conceptual idea, just kind of rely on the process. It was very much like being, to me, I was considered like being a watchmaker. You go into this very small, tight world. I didn't think of them collectively in terms of how they relate to each other. When I built them or made them, that was part of it, not to think that way. And then because they're pins, and New York City is such a sheetrock city that it was interesting for me. Well, I guess the whole country is now, but at the time, you take these pins and basically stick them anywhere into a sheetrock. So it was part of being able to play with architecture directly. And in fact, Garth, Greenan, who's sitting here in the front row, was my dealer, and he sold this piece to a collector, and we went up to install it. And I remember we were new in terms of working with each other, and I had about, I don't know, maybe 8 pins left, and I just handed it to him and said, okay, put the last 8 in. And I think he thought maybe I was kidding, but he watched all the time I was doing it, so you got an idea of what I was going for. Basically what I was going for was dealing with the corner, as I recall, and playing with this corner. So depending on the architecture, the configuration of the placement of the pieces changed. Playing with the architecture. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the color? Because these are definitely the kind of browner, darker in your shifted.
Yeah, well,
along with that, maybe I'll switch to this is one of the pieces in the show upstairs.
Right.
From this is 1970. These were 1969 and 70.
Yeah.
So I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, go back to the other thing you're saying. Like the color, like I was trying to, at the time, I was trying not to use traditional art materials, particularly for color. And I'm living in New York City, so I use a lot of rock salt, and anything I get my hands on, they were granule, and I just didn't want the reference of kind of fine art in that sense in terms of material. I was looking for something that was fresher to my eyes, so I respond to it differently than all the history that I admire and also reject. But I was looking for some fresh territory for myself, so I used other materials. The resin, it's like paint. Paint, basically any kind of paint, whether it's oil, acrylic, lacquer, whatever. There's a vehicle there, and inside the vehicle are some source of pigment. And so this material, being the resin, can hold a wide range of choices in terms of what you can put in there. So that opened it up in terms of other possibilities in terms of color. So color was an important aspect. And I was also, in New York City at that time, a lot of artists, dancers, painters, sculptors, musicians, a lot of us, because we lived geographically in a close area, which became Soho, this is before Soho, we were in each other's lives. So a lot of us worked in other areas. So like a dancer might ask you to build something for the performance or whatever. So I was doing a lot of dancing with different dance companies at the time, and including my wife's. And the dancers and the choreographers were looking for people that didn't have a dance background, so that you weren't stylized. And anyway, the point I guess what I'm trying to say is I was getting very involved with just how the body works. So this piece here was like taking roving, which is basically a kind of rope, taking it and going like this 15 times, tying a knot, and then throwing it on the floor. Just keep doing that, and then taking it on to another step of casting it, whatever. But the idea of it was partially physiological in terms of movement, and dancing along with other people. Alan Shields, there was a crew. We had a crew there of people that some of you might know about, but all of us were really strongly affected by the dancing because you became so aware of body movement and what the body can do, in terms of material or in terms of process or in terms of gesture, whatever. And it gave it just another understanding of physical possibilities. Because if you're going to cantilever something off the wall, like a piece upstairs, Batia Red, when you're standing and you lean out, you can, you're just leaning, you can feel what you do with your body in order to achieve that position. So that information can be transferred into other materials. So I think dance was a really great way of understanding physics and gravity and the reality of being on this planet. You know? The next one. This piece was done in Bennington, Vermont. I went up there and did a show for them. I did a couple of them, I guess, and they commissioned me to do some work. And I finished my obligation in the sense I finished the work that I needed to do for the show. And we had a lot of snow on the ground at the time. And then this huge storm came in for this and it landed on this kind of a hill next to my studio that they gave me. And I had material left. I think I had about 30 gallons of resin left, something like that. And but I was pretty much out of pigment at that time. And so what I decided to do was to cast it in the snow and let snow beat the mold in a sense. And so I went directly to the snow and I made forms basically with my hands. And then I put this mylar, which like a mylar film, I put that into the snow so when the resin was poured into that you would get that surface on the mylar, give me a dense surface. And I didn't know if it was going to work or not. I had no idea. In fact, I thought it might not work because this material should not be used at below 30, 34, 35 degrees. It was a hell of a lot colder than that when I did it. I compensated, in terms of creating more friction, did more stirring to build it up, to build the heat up, and it worked. And it was, in fact, the work I did for the show, I wasn't as excited about it as I was the work that I did in the snow. Those things happen. You have this direction, this goal, this need to complete something, and you're doing something else over here, and it turns out this thing you're doing over here has maybe more value than the thing you're really focusing on, And in this case, it was like priorities that I didn't go there to do that to work. I mean, if I had decided to go there to work in the snow, I probably would have bought more pigment and, just one of those things like responding to a situation. These are paper pieces that I did in Wisconsin, outside of Barnerville, outside of Madison. I was invited up to a visiting artist thing, and this fellow up there named Bill Weege, who runs the printmaking department there, and he had this deal with different artists that he would invite up, and he would print the pieces, and then at the end, whatever work you completed, the artist had the first choice. So he 50-50. He would take 50% of the work, and the artist had the other 50. But the artist had the first choice of the first 50, and so that's what happened with these. He invited me to do this because he knew I had an attitude, kind of a negative attitude, a very negative attitude towards printmaking at the time, and my thinking, I think, is somewhat justified, and then again, it's not so justified. But anyway, that's where I was. And when I was a student, I remember I got out of the military, and I went to school, and blah, 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 and I had to take printmaking, which is something I wanted to do. I wanted to see what that was about. And when I walked into the printmaking studio, there was these signs on the wall. This is how you make intaglio. This is how you make, how do you, step 1 to step 15. How do you make a print? And right away, when I saw those signs, instinctively from where I'm coming from, I thought, no, I don't want to be in this room. If there's a list of things that you do to make art, there's something wrong with that list. So I didn't take it. So anyway, so that's why he asked me to go up there to make prints, because I don't have that kind of respect for the craft at that time. There's some prints I love. I mean, that are even historic old print. Anyway, I don't have the same issue with printmaking. But anyway, when I got up there, I decided that I started thinking about what printmaking is and different possibilities. And I thought, well, first of all, why do you have to put the ink on top of the work, on top of the paper? If in fact you're going to print on paper. So I got a hold of pulp. I made my own paper. So I started the color from inside the paper. And I didn't use a printing press. I used a sledgehammer, and there was a large concrete area that I used. Basically, I pounded the pigments. The brighter colors you see are on the top going into it. They were pounded in with just striking it with a hammer. I wasn't that angry at printmaking that I hit it with a hammer, but it just, the idea of compression and weight, like what a press can do, which is fine, I have nothing against that. But I thought, why do you need a machine to do that? Why can't you use your hands and just hit it and push it, that? So that's how these came about. And Jody and I were looking at it, and I think they're probably not prints at all. They're paper pieces, And then Bill Winke said, you know, you really aren't doing prints. He was happy with what was happening. He said, you're really not doing prints. He said, I was thinking about it. And he says, you're Van Buren, so here. And he hands me a thing called a Buren, which is a tool that a traditional tool that printmakers use. And so I did do a couple of prints, but these works are more important to me than the printmaking. That piece there is an earlier piece, a geometric piece is upstairs, Bertolli. That had to do with casting. In terms of verbs, it was casting and slicing, cutting. And you know, in that piece I was using terracotta and rock salt, different kinds of minerals, fiberglass chopped strands, and yeah, that's what that was. Let me go to the next one if you want.
So,
Yeah.
do you want to talk a little bit about the toxicity?
Oh yeah,
Resin?
sure.
Because, right?
Sure.
It's a pretty big factor.
Yeah, well, I used the resin for years. I did some research, and not a lot, but I had a few friends, Bob Duran, anyway, let's make names, but anyway, I had a few friends who were all started working with polyester for one reason or another. And 3 of the 4 of us got very sick from it. I was doing fine. I had a good exhaust system. And I thought I knew what I was doing in terms of creating a situation that was safe in terms of airflow and all that. And but I didn't consider the fact that, you know, I'm around these things all the time, you know. And even when I'm not casting, I'm still around them, and they're still curing, even though they're solid. So I got myself in trouble in terms of toxic. And I had a studio at PS1 in Queens and New York, and I had to go into, I didn't have to, I went into New York City to play in this game, and I started playing, and I started smelling resin, and I thought I must have spilled some on myself. Then I realized I was getting this out of my pores, so I kind of freaked and went to the hospital, and they checked me out, and anyway, so I ended up running 5 miles a day for 2 years. I think I hated every stride, but I ran 5 miles a day for a couple years and drank milk. They said that was helped to pass the material through my body, and it worked in the sense I didn't have any liver damage or anything like that. But I stopped using the material. There were other reasons too, but that was one of the major reasons. I stopped using that material, and then I came to this material, which is a thermoplastic. After a lot of struggle, trying a lot of different materials, and I started working with this thermoplastic. So upstairs, you know, these pieces are upstairs. This is all thermoplastic. And this material that I got hold of, I initially found the material from a fellow from New Jersey. He ran a company called Unnatural Resources. And he was running around to different medical facilities buying up medical scrap in that sense. And this thermoplastic that he would purchase, or maybe he got it free, I don't know. But anyway, he was starting this business. And the material was designed to replace cartilage. It was designed to go inside the body, so it wasn't toxic at all. So that was one of the main things that I wanted to do, just in terms of staying healthy and all that business. And but I think more important than my medical condition is that these pieces, the thermoplastic, are very different than the resin pieces in the sense of process. Like all this work here in the thermal is all hand, it's all touch, this is really about modeling. It's about taking your hand, and everything here is made by my hand, by just twisting and turning and whatever I'm doing. And then I would use a knife also, and that's the only tool I would use, would be my hands and a knife, and I would use the knife just to draw out. It's kind of hard to see these slides, but where is a good example of that? There we go. Yeah. Like things like we pulled out like that, like I would take my knife and just pull that out a little bit. Other than that, it's all hand. There's a lot of DNA on here. It was kind of funny because these forms in here that are attached to the shells, I have a very kind of smooth surface. I wanted that in contrast to the surface that's here. And I tried different lubricants to try to I would heat it, and I tried olive oil, I tried vegetable oil, I tried different things. It turned out saliva was the best thing. Saliva. I tried, I go like that, and then the saliva would work beautifully. And it got problematic because long day at the studio, I'd run out of saliva. So literally, it was part of my tools was chewing gum. I would chew a lot of gum. to that stage. But
do you want to explain too how the thermoplastic comes and then how it's transformed?
yeah.
It's really interesting.
Well, the thermo that I use, because when I got the stuff initially from my natural resources, it was a wide range. It was grids and all kinds of stuff. But the stuff I've been using for years now, it looks literally like the kernels of rice. It's white and it's about the same size as rice. In fact, the labeling on it is, be careful with the kids, right? Because it looks like it could be, you could eat it or something. So it looks just like rice. And in my studio, I have a couple of burners, and I have a 55-gallon drum of water. And it's kind of like a kitchen, that one little area where I use different types of pans and woks. And I put water in there, boil the water, put the pellets inside, and manipulate it from that point. And when it's still soft, I've modeled it to the form that I want, then I can just immerse it into cold water, and it will hold that position. So I don't have to wait for it to air. It will air cool too, but just in terms of a flow of work, I put it in the water, bang, it's solid, and I bring it back. And there's a lot of verbs, art verbs, kind of in making these thermal pieces, because there's welding in the sense that these pieces are joined together by heating both sides and bringing it together. So there's a molecular connection. There's certainly paint, and all the color is on the surface. It's all done in a very traditional way, meaning a brush and paint. In this case, it's acrylic paint. And I would usually use, in most of the pieces, would usually use some kind of, sometimes maybe I mix some aluminum dry pigment into the paint, because I want a very reflective surface. I want light to hit it, and I want the light to be active. And and when you look at the resin pieces, one of the similarities is that the resin gives me depth by the nature of resin, or the way I use it, the nature of resin. But in those pieces, the thermal, I still had this idea of depth. So that's why there's so much overlapping, so your eye goes into the piece. And shells, I was using shells that I could collect where I live, but I didn't particularly like them a lot visually. And so I get most all the shells. Sometimes friends will give me some, but normally all the shells are ordered online for different parts of the world. I was getting a lot from the Philippines. Then I found out what the government's doing over there, so I stopped doing that. Trying to stay ahead of that sort of political situation and not be part of it. So there was some changes that way, because a lot of these. I was in Vietnam and I was watching, maybe I didn't count them, of course, maybe 100 people on this beach, and they were working, and they collected shells, and I was just watching, what the hell are they doing, and they would collect all these shells, and then they'd put them in specific piles, and I couldn't determine, what the value of the differences were, and because I wasn't sure what their motive was, other than I knew it was about making money and harvesting, and but it was curious to me, you have these different groups of shells, and what does that mean other than a kind of sense of order? And that started me thinking about shells and the possibilities of that. And as you can see upstairs, I'm playing a lot with man-made, obvious man-made materials and very naturalistic materials, and playing with that dialogue between them. A shell to me is I don't want to get into a philosophical discussion, but in terms of nature, I think as soon as a human takes a shell out of context, it's already, meaning if a shell is in the water and you pick it up and you eat the clam, it's no longer, the shell itself is no longer doing what it's designed to do. It's no longer a piece of architecture for some kind of living thing. And so the idea of taking nature and using it as a reference to something that is obviously not found in nature was interesting to me. And and I think a lot of artists, you try to challenge yourself. So shells, are obviously cliches. Most people, or a lot of people anyway, really enjoy looking at shells. They're quite beautiful in terms of nature. So that becomes not something that makes it easier for me. It makes it harder, because how do you take something that already has this quality that humans like, including myself, and how do you take that and use it in some kind of, in this case, sculptural context, without being dependent on it and not just being decorative about it. Although, I am constantly trying to be seductive in that sense. I was talking to Jody about that, and I call it art bait. In the sense that I'll put something in there because I really want to get the viewer's eye to travel down and locate that. And so I do use. I am consciously choosing material that I find, whether it's stuff for kids or acrylic beads for kids to make jewelry with or whatever. It becomes, how do you, to use the word transcendence, how do you transcend that? How do you make that thing work other than the context that it was designed for? And so that's what that part was about. And then the resin pieces, because of the possibility of playing with transparencies and translucency and opaqueness and all that, it became important to me as an issue and an idea of, sculpture so much has to do with what you see on the surface, because the material that normally is used by through so many years has a solid, opaque quality to it. So with the resin, of course, your eye can go inside that form, right? So to me, if you're making a form like this, as an example, it is about this, but with this, there's also, it could be a dialogue going on inside this, right? Opposed to just painting it on the exterior.
Do you want to talk about the return to resin?
The what?
What prompted a return to?
Oh yeah, well, I stopped using the resin, and Garth, we hired a friend of mine and who worked for basically Garth and I in that sense. He would deliver my work down in New York, and he went up to, Garth had him go up to Bennington and pick up these pieces that I did. They were, for 35 years they've been sitting outside in the weather, and brought them back to me. And because of that long period of time and being outside like that, there was a lot of contraction and expansion of material, so a lot of cracks took place. And so I, Garth was excited about seeing them. He heard about them, blah, 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 encouraging me in that. And so I started, basically, I restored them. And what I did is I primarily used just clear, I didn't put new color in, I primarily just filled the cracks with clear resin, But in that process of doing that, memory in terms of smell is an interesting thing, right? Smell brings back such intimate memory. And when I was doing this, I didn't have a studio set up for that. I did this all outside. That piece upstairs is called Mosquito Country. That's why it's called Mosquito Country. I'm working outside and mosquitoes are coming in. So I cast a few mosquitoes in that, and that one, the bottom one. But in the process of working with some material again, it felt so good to be able to work with color in that way, opposed to always working on the surface. It allowed a whole range of possibilities that I was interested in that an opaque surface could not give me. So that part was important to me. And there's a big difference between these pieces and the thermal pieces. One of the differences is because this is all done in terms of casting, where the thermal pieces are all touch. It's all hand touch. This is not. This is liquid. And I kind of designed or developed my own way of casting, where I would simply, very straightforward, to kind of cast a form. And once that form was solid, then things start getting interesting. Then when I had this object, this form, then I would drill into it wherever I decided to, and then I would create another mold and attach it to that, so that the piece would grow in that sense. There's no one mold that deals with the entire object. It's a series of molds, right? So every color you see here particularly is a different mold, a different pouring. And it doesn't have a touch. But these pieces kind of do, because I had my assistant, Gary, I hired him, he did the sanding. And why I wanted in these pieces, I wanted it sanded because I wanted the light to go into it slowly, opposed to being, with the Mylar gives you a very smooth surface, and because light can go through there very quickly, particularly if there's nothing in there. But when you sand it, you scratch basically the outside surface, so when the light hits it, it goes into it very slowly and then it comes back out slowly. So it gives a different color quality, which I still like. But now I'm really invested in what I'm putting inside. Probably spent maybe an hour to sand that piece. Where if that whole piece was sanded like these pieces, it could take 2 weeks to a month to sand it, because there are very intricate areas and blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, I'm not, I will sand a little bit in areas where there's nothing upstairs showing that, and I'm doing a little bit more of that right now, where I'm playing with a wider range of transparency based on how light penetrates the material, besides just what is happening in terms of color. And, yeah.
So how did you get to the point where you're adding so much back into the resin?
Sorry?
How did you get back to the point where you're adding so much into the resin? These are pretty pared down.
Yeah. Well, just thinking, but playing around with, playing around with man-made, obviously man-made things, and things that were related to nature. Like the feathers, as an example, have really been attacked by man in the I don't mean in an aggressive sense, but I guess I shouldn't use the word attack, but it's really been changed by man. In other words, here you have like this feather here as an example. I mean, there wasn't a rooster running around with that color. That feather was dyed, And so, and I was using, like in this piece, Bling Bop, I went to the fashion area in New York City where you get findings and things, and I was buying costume jewelry and different stuff that you put on dresses to sparkle, and I was looking for things that would really react to light, but at the same time I knew it wasn't just a normal thing of just reacting. It has cultural significance to it, and part of that, this is where it gets, I'm a little embarrassed about talking about it because it gets kind of, not evangelistic, but anyway, there's a whole thing about balancing to me, and balancing things that seem to be in opposition and trying to bring it together to make a kind of sense. It's always trying, kind of like the metaphor of somebody juggling, if somebody's juggling 3 oranges, who gives a shit? You know how to do 3 oranges, but if somebody's balancing a blowtorch and a half a cup of milk and an orange, that's interesting because they're so different. And when you balance, you're putting something in order, balancing, maybe not balancing, you're juggling. You're putting something in a state of order, So part of it is, that's using it as a metaphor, part of it is kind of like that in the sense of like, how do I make these things that are somewhat opposite still work together and make a kind of sense, a kind of supportive sense? And I try to be positive in the sense of what I'm trying to accomplish. I mean, meaning that I'm not looking for a party, but I'm kind of looking for, and not a celebration particularly, but I'm looking for a kind of a humanistic, positive experience, whatever the hell that might mean. But,
Joy.
Huh?
Joy.
Yeah. And I told, anyway, I was in Walmart. That was the story. I went to Walmart and I went to Walmart because I hate going to Walmart, and I'm kind of against the whole thing. And sometimes where I live in Maine, we live in a very rural area. You guys have a metropolitan here. I mean, it's huge to me. But where I live, there is a Walmart about 25 miles away. And I needed something that I couldn't get online when I needed it. So I ran over to see if they had it. And I was feeling kind of dirty and awkward being up in Walmart buying stuff. And because I know a lot of people that were wiped out by Walmart where I live. Anyway, so I went there and I bought 6 chartreuse and magenta squirt guns. And I bought a half a dozen jump ropes that were kind of pink. The plastic was supposed to be the rope, and then these 2 chartreuse handles. And then when I bought that, I kind of walked over the area where kids buy stuff to make jewelry with and play with and stuff. And I went over there and saw stuff, and that's kind of interesting. So I ended up getting a pile of stuff. And I had an attitude because I didn't like being there. And I went to the cashier, and the cashier looked at what I bought. This guy's buying all this stuff. it was kind of weird to her, you know, sequins and anyway, all this stuff. And she said to me, you know, the Walmart sales, she said, "Oh, it looks like you're getting ready to have a party, sir." And I said, "No, actually, I'm taking this stuff home and I'm putting it in the blender and I'm grinding it all up." And she looked like I just said I'm going to murder 75 hamsters and 2 squirrels. But that's what I literally did. I was looking for transparent and translucent material. I didn't want to put a squirt gun in. Now I'm thinking about putting squirt guns in, but at the time I didn't want to put a squirt gun. I really wanted that translucency, that transparency. And so I used it like pigment. I would put it in the blender and grind it up. And some of the colors, like in this piece, Bling, there is ground up red clam shells that are in there. I'll take shells sometimes and I'll break that into pigment. And so yeah, does that answer the question? This is Chiqui, which is upstairs. Chiqui is Passamaquoddy for "come here," and it's an expression normally that parents will use for their children. And when a child hears Chiqui, it's a very soft word, Chiqui, they run over there as fast as they can. They know Mom and Pop are really pissed off. They better get there really quick. And why I use that word, besides just the connection to the tribe, because a lot of my friends are from the tribe. Anyway, I want you to, it's like saying, "come here." And inside the pieces, to me, you know, I really hope that people get inside there and really look inside. And you can't see it unless you are really, really close. So that's where Chiqui came from in terms of a title. And it's for me, like when I show my work and I'm watching somebody looking at my work, I can tell just by their body where they stand and where they move to, how much of the work they've seen. And so most people are used to seeing paintings, so they look at it very frontally. They might create different distances from the painting, but basically that's what you do. That's all you have to do in most cases. But with my work, I'm very concerned about how it works all the way around, even the wall pieces, that curve, that arc. So you cannot see the whole piece at all unless you do move around the piece, you know. And now more lately, the work I'm doing right now seems to deal with that more, where now the frontal part, just in terms of scale, is not as elaborate or as complex as happening on the sides. So that, I think that's where I'm at right now. I'm really doing a lot of work besides the frontal. If you stand in front, I'm really spending a lot of time what's happening when you look at different side perspectives. And where you're standing in relationship to the object or the sculpture is important to me in terms of what you see, meaning that when you move your position, the viewer moves their position, the piece will change because you're seeing it from a different perspective. I think that's one of the things about minimal art, because I was considered like a minimal artist, and I should have been considered a minimal artist at one point in time, but I also got really tired and suspicious of even what I was doing, you know. A friend of mine, Bob Grosvenor, we were both going to be in this show, which we were, which is a sport show and all that stuff, and the Jewish Museum, and you were the primary structure show, and Bob called me up and he wanted me to come down and look at his sculpture before I went up to the museum, and I was in sort of the same state in my work. And I said, "Okay, Bob, well, what's the piece?" And I hadn't been by a studio in a long time, so I said, "What's the piece about?" So he described it over the telephone. And then I went up to his studio to see it. It was exactly what he described on the telephone. That rang a lot of bells to me. If you can describe a piece over the telephone and it looks like what you described, I'm suspicious. You know, in terms of, it's not that he was wrong, just in the sense of like, you know, that's such a language thing, and obviously you're dealing in another kind of language. If it can be explained that thoroughly, it made me nervous, you know, and it's suspicious of myself and my activity. And you know, I'd walk up to a large cube that Judd might make, or Ronnie Bladen or somebody, and one of Ronnie's pieces, Bladen's, was just basically a white box that I really kind of liked in terms of the paint, the white. And you know, you stand on one side of the rectangle, and then you walk around. So it's a repeat, right? Every side is the same. I thought, you know, why is that always so interesting? If it creates mystery, I'm for it. If it creates like, what is that? That's terrific. I'm for that. But if it's just reinforcing itself, I'm not so much for that, and for myself I'm talking about. So I had a lot of opportunities at museums and stuff, and galleries and stuff for shows, and I was a young guy just getting to New York, and a lot of things were open for me, and I just dragging my ass to the studio. All of a sudden, it was so hard to work, and I was trying to figure out why is it so hard, and then I realized that when I sat down, because I was working with wood and I was fiberglass in the exterior of the wood, the forms were very geometric, and the good part was the part that interested me was doing the drawing, and the other part that was interesting to me was the very end, and everything in between. I didn't want to become a cabinet maker. I mean, it was like I was busy doing things that to me was not of interest, and it was always working to get a job done. There was never an opportunity to get a new idea or to see something new and respond to that. And so I made a list of all the verbs that I do in the studio, you know, cutting, sanding, da, 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 this long list, and I looked at the list and I realized about 75% of these things that I do, that I am responsible for creating, I don't like doing that stuff. So I eliminated that and just started working with things that interested me, and one was the resin part, pouring the resin over the material and putting pigments in the material, and blah, blah, blah. So that, in doing that, the work just changed radically. And my deal at the time was very compassionate to what was going on in terms of my work, and was happy to show them and stuff. And it became another kind of New York school, you know. That happens very quickly. And but when I was a little kid, I spent time when I was by myself, you know, playing like other kids, you know, playing in mud, creating rivers and dams, and putting the hose on or a bucket of water and watch the earth change or the channels you make change, and I would put little things in it and watch it move and da da da. And I realized, not just this week, but I realized just relatively recently, just, you know, maybe 6 months ago, how that time when I was a little kid, just going off into my kid world, how important that was in terms of what I'm doing now. Somehow, that same kind of process feels very comfortable for me to deal with liquid and watch the liquid, like, you know, how nature works, how something viscous can move and change solid objects and things that nature does. You know, I'm, you know, like I said earlier when I first started talking, in terms of Maine, it's so vivid up there in terms of the forces of nature, and it's what I like to do. You know, I like the process of how things collect and move and all that. And then it becomes kind of like cooking in a sense. Like I'll have a mold and I will use this, like every color here. Like every one of these, like this form, this form, this form, this form. All these forms have exactly the same material in them, and maybe different quantities, but exactly the same material. So I'm interested in how that changes. You know, what's the differences? Not just the similarities, but what are the differences? And so yeah, I like my process. I like working. It's I don't know about pleasure, but it's what I spent a lot of time doing, and I think it's about being that little kid again. I think it's something about it just seems to be a very, in my case, a natural way of spending time. This is the most recent piece. It's upstairs. I haven't shown it yet until now. In my studio, I didn't have a wall as high as this where I could put pieces up to study the configuration, and I put it up so I could look at it, of course, and I tried a couple of configurations, but the scale of my wall, I was not happy with what I did there. So I came here in October, and I looked at the height of the walls. I mean, Jody told me on the phone the size of the walls, but it's good to see it, you know. So I saw the size of the walls and stuff, and that became really important in terms of placing it, you know, how I could place it. So I didn't want to come into the museum and just start drilling holes, make a wall look like Swiss cheese or something, because every time I put one in, you know, I didn't like it, I'd move it over, right? So I would leave a hole. So I felt kind of successful in this piece, because I nailed it in the sense of feeling good about the configuration, but I only had to move one of the pieces. I drilled in one, I ended up not liking it, and I moved that, and that was that. So it was, you know, a feeling of success and accomplishment because they didn't put holes all over your walls here in the museum. You know.
We'll just patch and paint it.
No, you said that. You told me that. When I didn't apologize, but I said, oh, you know, you said, don't worry about it, Richard. You'll be painted, and it is, you know. But sometimes placing, when I do multi-unit pieces, sometimes the placement is extremely important. I don't know if it's ever the most important, but it's extremely important in terms of what I want out of the piece. And it's, you know, it's about letting the pieces also breathe. You know, have some space so you can see the whole object, or the whole element. And it's also about a kind of dialogue that goes in there. It's working on a kind of a tight rope in a sense. You know, it's because it can go a lot. I mean, the idea of just making a straight line, like Judd as an example, just putting a series of forms on a straight horizontal line. That's a very coherent, clear thing to do, and I certainly respect it. It's also boring as hell for me to do that. It just seems that there's a whole opportunity there of placement and architecture and light and color and situation that the pieces are in that you're just not playing with enough, you know, or you're not taking advantage of that. And so the act of placing them is another level of kind of composition, because it's composition that takes place within the object, within the object, and is this thing working? Huh? Okay. Yeah, placement is very important, and before I started using color, like I was saying earlier, when I stopped when the work became not so geometric or not geometric, I wasn't using any color at all. I was just using clear resin, and I was concerned with how light goes through the clear resin, but I was using pieces. I mean, a piece might have 55 elements in it, and the act of placing those elements on the wall was critically important to the piece. You know, I'm finding now that like these pieces have, you know, I'll do an ego trip, has so much depth within the object itself. I think it lends itself to being, there's a wide range of choices what I can do with these objects. You know, but it also depends a lot on the architecture and, or on the physical situation. So that's what that is.
I think that's a good place to end it.
Okay.
And open it up to questions.
I covered everything.
Question?
Yes.
Richard, I noticed on the resin sculptures you have, when there's an opening in the resin,
Yeah.
surrounded by small...
Surrounded by what?
You have it surrounded by small marine invertebrates.
Yes.
And there's a lot of them in there.
Yeah.
There's many, many different species.
Yeah.
What's going on there? There we
Yeah,
are.
thank you, yeah. Well, just explain like how I do it just physically. This material, like I said earlier, right, is viscous, it's liquid. So in this area, which is an opening, of course, I'll take dry plaster and sometimes dry for taping and drywall, but in a dry sense. In other words, like plaster. And I'll take the plaster and I'll put a pigment inside it and possibly some minerals or whatever, and like you said, shells. And I'll build like an island, you know. And so when I pour the resin in, the resin will come and stop where I built up. And then it'll become solid. Then I vacuum, literally vacuum the granule stuff out. Hello? Yeah. I'll vacuum the dry granule stuff out, and that gives me the negative space. And why shells there? It's a source of color. It's an obvious source of nature. I think when I was earlier on in my work, and when I was sort of a minimalist in a sense, somebody would look at my work and they look at it and they say, "Oh yeah, I can see the elephant over here, and I can see a giraffe over here, or something else," you know. And at the time, I really resented that. I felt that they saw that they were bringing too much to what I was doing, and it's not what I was doing. And I kind of, well, I had an attitude about that, like, "Oh, you don't get it," you know. I would say it to myself, and that's changed radically in terms of my thinking. And you know, the idea that somebody comes and looks at your work with no history is absurd. So everybody is carrying history, and somebody's history is not, it may not be more important than somebody else's history, you know. And so the idea of having things that you can identify with that, in a sense, seduce you into thinking or looking, or both, became important to me. And so now I'm really working, I have been since I've been the maid, I'm kind of working very consciously and trying to have the pieces open enough that someone with whatever their history might be can go to it and start identifying with something, you know, something, you know. So the shells, you know what a shell is, you know. So if it was the same, that just imagine that little shell you're talking about was not a shell, but it was a source of color, it would have a different meaning. Let's just say it was a solid piece of pigment. That's very different than it being a shell, you know. So making the work available to a wide range of people, opposed to just art world people, was very important to me. And in Maine, I feel really good about how the work has gone, because I'm around a lot of people who are very visually oriented and know nothing and care nothing about art particularly, other than maybe beadwork and stuff. But they have an aesthetic, and they have an interest. And so now, with the people that I'm with in Maine, neighbors and friends, it's very reaffirming that I'm accomplishing what I want to accomplish. That they can find and involve themselves in the work. You know, that they don't feel ignorant. Art can be, you know, very almost class-like. You know, when people, you know, my son can do that. My daughter can do that. You know, a child can do that. You know, or the artist is considered some kind of like pulling one over on somebody. It can be very intimidating for a lot of people, fine art, and I kind of resent that. I understand it, and I kind of resent that. I've been trying to, without making it pop art or making it kitsch or playing with those ideas in that sense. It's important to me that a wide range of people can respond to the work in many different ways, not a particular way. And so what the shells might mean to me could be very different than what they might mean to you, right? And but I consciously choose materials at times that are very specific, that people can know what it is, you know. And so using that in a context is part of the problems that I deal with. And I had a party in my studio. A good friend of mine from the tribe got married, and he asked if he could have his bachelor party in my studio, and I was a little nervous about it, but. And they brought down a couple of strippers, and my wife was out of town, and I got permission. And I was, you know, it was kind of hokey what they wanted to do, and anyway, and I was the only non-tribal member. No, the father of the bride was there. He and I were the only non-tribal members there. It was, you know, about 50 guys there, I guess. And I knew everybody, and they all knew me, but none of them had seen my art. And so they knew I was an artist from New York, but they didn't know what the hell I did. I don't think they really cared too much what I did. But I had one piece or two pieces up, just because I didn't want to move them for the party, and they were safe and everything. And these two guys were looking at the work and talking, and I know these guys. They're both were fishermen, and I went up to hear what they're saying and stuff. And one guy says, Jackson says to Crow, he says, Richard, he's got tremendous patience. Right? And I don't, you know, I wouldn't say I have patience, but I don't think but what that meant to them was that, what I gathered what it meant to them was that there's so much complexity, and there's so much stuff going on. In order to achieve that, it must take a lot of time. And in Maine, there's, you know, real problems with economics, and so most men do maybe 2 or 3 different types of work to survive, you know, in terms of vocations and stuff. So you finish the job, you go on to the next one, you finish the job just to finish the job. So to stay with something that shows a lot of time is an image to them as patience, you know? And I kind of I took that as a compliment. And the accessibility, in other words, they like the work. You know, granted they like the work because we're friends, but they respected that activity, you know. Without being in the art world, they saw that, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on here, you know, and hopefully, you know, it stimulates the thinking to start thinking, what is that about? You know, I don't have a written statement on the wall explaining what I do, you know, and nor do I want to in that sense. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Go ahead,
What
Jeff.
I was, now you were talking about, of course, these are fairly three-dimensional pieces, and you like people to look around them and be able to really discover things and so on. But how much do you take into consideration what kind of a shadow the form takes? Like upstairs, some of those pieces create such beautiful shadows.
Thank you.
And variations in that. How much do you take that into consideration as you're...
Yeah, it's tricky because you could really do a real theatrical number with those pieces in terms of lighting. You could really make those shadows become really important, you know, in terms of vivid and strong as images. So there's an edge there for me that, you know, I don't want it to be too theatrical in that sense. I think galleries normally is a kind of a theatrical situation. You know, you have a frozen, you know, you have controlled light in many cases, you know, and like a theater in that sense. And you can manipulate the object or the objects of the painting due to the source of light, the direction of light and all that. So, did I answer your question? I don't know.
Well, I was just wondering how much you consider it. Like, for instance, the images you have up here, I don't see any shadows. I mean, and but up in the gallery, they create such beautiful shadows that enhances the whole piece. To me.
Yeah, no, when I build the pieces, I know that something's protruding from the wall for a certain distance. When you put light on it, it can create a shadow. But to answer your question, when I build the pieces, I don't consider that when I'm actually building the pieces. But when I set the pieces up, then that becomes a possibility. And Jody, there's a piece upstairs called Botticelli's Revenge, and I was sitting down, Jody was doing the lighting, and I was sitting down on a bench up there watching it. In other words, she was high on the ladder and I was low on a bench, and the way the light hit it, there was this very strong shadow, and then it got to be a light. There was a value in the shadows, and I really got off of it. And it wasn't too much. It was subtle, you know, because I don't want to be corny about it. I don't want to hit you over the head with that, you know, because I think there is a beauty to that. Not just, I don't mean just in my work, I just have how shadows work. I mean, the results, I mean, shadows are created by a light condition, right? And I think we all experience, forget art, we all experience sitting in our house with the light hitting the window a certain way, reflecting onto another piece of furniture on this. You know, the light is very active and a really strong possibility. But at the same time, I'm not interested in becoming like a light artist in that sense at all. I'm still connected to my hands and manipulating things. And
you also allow a lot of flexibility with it, right? I mean, you know that the dimensionality is going to create shadows, but you're open to different, you can't control, like we were talking about ceiling heights. You're going to have different effects with them in different contexts, and that's part of the kind of mutability of the works to me. That's always going to be a part of it, but in every different context, it's going to have a different effect. And so again, that's one more way that the works are really living kind of objects.
I think when you have, when you have natural light, so in other words, you have the movement of the sun, and how that movement of the sun affects the particular piece of space that you're in, you have a wide range of possibilities in terms of movement, In a gallery situation, that's normally not a situation, it's a frozen situation, and I like that, because for one reason, I mean, you go into a gallery, look at a piece of work, you don't spend 3 months in there looking at it, you go in and look at what the length of time it is, but it's an area of minutes opposed to days. So you're seeing in one given light situation for a relatively short period of time. And I think gallery lighting which I think comes out of theater as far as I'm concerned. And I don't think of theater in a negative sense. I think it really magnifies and clarifies and projects the possibilities of what's going on there by the vividness of what the light is giving you. But the idea of sun constantly changing and changing the quality of the shadows and the quality of advancing back, that's nice stuff. That's nice. I mean, if I can get a commission of work where I have a given light situation, meaning natural light plus track lighting or electric light, that's something to work with too. When you have a specific, like commissions, or you have a specific condition that that your work is going to be shown in it, it's really wonderful when you have that before you start working, so you can take that into your work and that consideration into your work. The shadows, like your question, the shadows. No, I don't build. I know that if something can come out from the wall, there's a possibility of creating a shadow. But I never put that thing there for that reason. I know it's going to happen. I know I could use it. But that's not why I put it there. I put it there how it's operating and relating to the other forms within the piece itself, opposed to the shadows. But shadows are really, because I'm playing with light, and color, and shadow is there. I mean, upstairs, when Jody lit some of the pieces, especially the ones that are on the pedestals, the light comes down through it and penetrates through it, and you can see the light being projected out around it. And to me, the light being projected around it is just as much of the sculpture as the solid material is, because you're looking at it, the situation. That's what's happening in that way. No, I did not make the light there because I didn't build the piece for a particular light condition. And I don't want to go there to do that either. I'd like for the pieces to be open enough to react to a wide variety of light possibilities. That's the answer. I think.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Yep.